good afternoon, good morning, whatever you are in the world. It's a great day here in Florida. And I am joined by my co host, Maria, who happens to be in a remote area in Brazil right now. And we do have special guests all the way from Spain, which I will give Maria the chance to introduce her. But today's topic really piqued my interest, and we will be delving into the intricate relationship between intercultural experiences and mental health. As we all know, in a world that is increasingly interconnected, understanding how cultures shape our mental being is more vital than ever. With that, I am going to give the mic to my co host, Maria, who will introduce our guest and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much, my dear Mona. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Nuria Jackson. She is an entrepreneur, a psychologist, and life and wellness coach. And before that, she worked for many years as an HR business professional. So she has a lot of experience when it comes to the subject of mental health. And specifically, since she is a woman who has had her share of intercultural experience, being born in Spain and then moving professionally to the US for many years, where she currently lives, even though she's in Spain right now, I think that talking about the intercultural impact on mental health is very important because we're seeing a lot of different countries are enacting laws that have to do with mental health issues in companies and business. And not only that, but we think about people who are expats or working abroad and how they have to deal with culture shock and having to adapt and adjust. And of course, thinking about how our cultural background might shape our perception of mental health. So I think this is a subject that we don't hear very much about, and I thought that Nuria would be able to shed some light and help us navigate this important subject. So Nuria, welcome, and tell us a little bit about what it is that interests you about this subject and why you think there's a need for this.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Mona. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation. So important, right, that you were talking about. It's crucial that we understand what is mental health and how it's affecting our well-being in general. And more that we can see that there is more impact, not only in the people's lives, but also at work as well. Like you mentioned, Maria, and we worked together before. I worked with you in training, with coaching programs in a company before, in a corporate office where I worked in human resources. And we discovered there as well that the balance is not only about talking about the balance and the diversity or leadership or any training in any skill, but also how is that impacting in the well-being and the mental health of people's lives. Talking about all of that balance is important because culture and background culture and shapes our experiences, right? Where we are coming from, that is shaping where you are right now, and also maybe can shape what you are going through, right? There are so many cultural stigmas, depending where your culture, where are you coming from. There are some stigmas that, for example, mental health is a sign of weakness sometimes, in some culture. Some other culture, they understand that mental health is a healthcare issue. But the big stigma here is that people don't talk about, right? And they don't like to talk about it. They don't like to talk about with friends or with family, maybe in some culture, right? And either in a corporate office or in your office with your colleagues or with your managers. And the real thing here is that we all struggle and we all have challenges in overall in our life. Anybody can have any challenge in life, for the loss of someone, for when you are grieving, for some kind of stress, or how you manage or how you handle stress, how sometimes you can have some anxiety just depending on how do you manage some situations. And that is something I see a lot, not only in a corporate office, that I saw that, right, from a human resources perspective, but also now that I'm collaborating with the schools and high schools and teenagers, I can see that they are struggling more and more when they are in that age, that later that can become an issue in your adulthood. So yes, it's very important to discuss about this. It's key that we understand what are the symptoms of the mental health problem or situations, and that we approach those symptoms before they become worse.
Let
Make
me ask you,
sense?
as an HR professional, have you been able to observe some companies that are more aware, or even cultures? For example, I know that a few years ago in Mexico, the government enacted certain rules and regulations about making sure that employees were considered not just their physical health, but also their mental health. And many companies started implementing certain things. I'm just wondering, is that something you've been able to compare, for example, say in Spain versus US, or anything that you've been able to see as far as companies taking the initiative to ensure their employees' mental health and well-being?
Yeah, and I think that is something that changed, and many companies, they experienced that change after COVID, right? I mean, we're talking that COVID is like how many years? Almost 4 years now, from 2020. So there have been many changes in stress management, in how to handle stress and life balance. So I saw that, I think that I saw more change in the USA, in America, in North America, sorry, USA and Canada. I saw that change and that talking about and that culture is maybe more open than other culture, like for example, more Latin America or in Spain, where maybe it's more difficult to talk about your feelings and your problems. And maybe people have more fear, to talk about it and to ask for help. Because, one thing is to talk with you and me, or Mona with here, we talk about our problems, right? Or we are having a coffee or something like that. And another thing is to ask for help, for a professional, that will help you to go through. So I saw a big change in mentoring programs, in coaching programs, in corporate offices, that they are incorporating more of that to what is a benefit package. So like you say, in Mexico, yes, there is a big impact in North America as well. Yeah.
Well, it seems like we appreciate what you are sharing with us, Nuria. As you are talking, I'm digesting every word and remembering so many instances where I had a conversation with Chinese clients and Chinese professionals, and sometimes they do not have the language to express the feeling. And I mean, like one day I heard that just the word "I am overwhelmed" is not expressed in that culture and doesn't have the words to express it. So when we don't have the language to express our feelings, it gets even harder to engage in a conversation where we can convey or share what we feel. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is also, and I noticed this with me as well, and you may agree, I was born in Morocco and been living in the US for 34 years, but there are certain times where there is identity crisis. And that happens with a lot of people. Where do I belong? I come with baggage, I come with values, I come with set of morals, with traditions. And then here I am trying to adapt, not so much assimilate, because that will never happen as we are beings. Then we come with so much with us, but you adapt into your new environment and you try so hard, you may succeed to a certain level, but you can fail sometimes. And then you have that constant struggle between where I come from and where I'm at now. How do I balance them out? Who am I? And this is happening to a lot of people. My question to you is, are corporations aware of this issue of identity crisis and how it affects performance?
Yeah, that's a good point, Mona. I totally agree. I mean, I moved 13 years ago from Spain to USA, and it took me, I think it took me like a few years, to adapt to the culture. And we are talking about little things, the time that you eat, the kind of food that you eat, right? The way that you manage your work schedule, the way that everything was very different, the way that you speak and you talk, and of course the language. I mean, the language is one of the number one barrier for anyone that moved to another country, because even that we speak the language, I can say now after 13 years that I speak the language, right? Probably the same that you, Mona, right? But there are still some concepts and some expressions that I don't get it, you know, or I don't express the same that I do in Spanish. Even the jokes, when you are talking about one joke in one culture versus in another culture is very different, right? So there are little things that I think that companies are aware, and in my experience, companies are aware that it has to be a process to adapt, you know, when an employee or someone is moving from one country to another. But I believe that the action plans are not there yet. And I mean with that, it's awareness. There is an awareness, but there is not much of action. It's like, okay, you go there and you survive. And people struggle, and maybe they want to come back and they want to move out, you know? And it's because the pressure, the stress, and the culture shock is heavy. And then can derivate also in mental health problem later.
Well, that's the whole purpose behind the post-arrival intercultural training that companies started learning to do, because if you take all that time and effort to relocate somebody to be an executive and then they or their spouse is unhappy and they suffer a breakdown, it's going to be very expensive and a big waste of resources to have to send them back. And part of the things that I think that the intercultural training does, and believe me, in my coaching, I've had people break down in tears, especially during that, the culture shock moment, is to just be there and help them understand that this is normal. This is a normal process. It's kind of like the grieving curve where you're having to say goodbye. And it's not so much that you idealize your own culture. It's just that you have a sense of loss of control over your life from going from an automatic pilot to having to think, like you said, of every little detail, how to order ham and cheese in kilos versus pounds, or where to get a specific product, or how to drive, all of that stuff. It's like an overload in your brain. And on top of that, you have to be productive. It's a lot, and people can get overwhelmed very quickly. I find usually within the first 4 to 6 weeks, that's when they need the most help. That kind of how you suffered your culture shock as well? When you had to adapt?
Yes. In my opinion, yes. And you make a really good point there. It's not only you when we are talking about companies moving employees, you know, expats from one country to another. It's not only the employee. We are talking here about the family, like you mentioned it, right? I saw so many people that they left the country because the family didn't adapt. And not only the language, but maybe, you know, the spouse, the wife, or the husband, or anything around, you know, or missing the other people or the other country culture. So yeah, it's very important to address that. I will say even previously, and I mean with that, and I had a lot of conversation with employees before they move here, you know, like, hey, you need to know that here, for example, in USA, you need to pay a tomato, I don't know, $3 versus $1. I don't know, you said stupid example, right? But you need to have different approaches that later you need to manage life in a different way. So I would say previously, before the employees or the families move, I would say an intervention there. And later when they arrive, for sure, an intercultural training or coaching it will be very important. Yes, I agree.
Absolutely. I remember when I came here as a cultural exchange student, nobody gave me training. They just like dumped me in the middle of the ocean and say, hey, go ahead and learn how to swim. Go ahead and learn how to get to safe shores. And even with the money, the currency, I was so lost to the point where when I went to buy something, I did not know what they were asking me for. Too many things, 25 cents, 37 cents, whatever. I said, I just pull out everything I had in my pocket and say, here, take what you want. and it can get confusing. Now, going back to the point we were talking about, the children. I mean, we have adult, we have, let's say, someone received an assignment, spouse, these are adults, they're trying to cope. Then you have 2 or 3 children going with you. That can be tough. And sometimes we're not prepared. We're not prepared for how are the kids going to deal with the new environments. Because let me just tell you, if kids are not happy, your life is hell.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
So,
Exactly.
not just not the fact that we have to provide trainings to the person and the spouse, but we also have to be aware of the trauma that we can put our kids into, taking them to a new environment.
I totally.
Are employers aware of this or considering a package where they address this with children as well?
I saw that some companies do those kind of packages, that include the family. Let's say the family, how they adapt, for example, for the next or the following 2 or 3 months. But I saw more with the spouses, more with the children's. But there's a good point, I mean, if it's not the same, right? It's not the same that if you come alone as an employee, that when you bring your family and with kids as well, because your kids need to adapt to the school, to the new way that the school actually is processing everything, and the language as well. Doesn't matter if it's from Spain to USA or from the USA to, I don't know, to Japan, for example, right? So adapting the whole family and the whole overall well-being of the family, it's going to be very important to reduce that stress or anxiety that can cause in the house, at work, and in general in the family.
I can tell you that there are certain companies that do include children in cross-cultural training. They're called youth programs. And that said, being a third culture child myself, I moved when I was 6, then when I was 10, then when I was 12, and then when I was 16. None of that stuff existed back then.
Well, I'm glad to see you alive and well and healthy, Maria. You survived.
I'm okay. But I always assure parents that young children are much more resilient because they're not quite as stuck in their ways and are open to change. And third culture kids, which is basically kids who have moved and have had along the way, have had to adapt to new cultures that are different from their parents or their national origin, they actually turn out okay in the sense that they learn a lot of adaptation skills. So one of the things that I assure my clients is don't worry so much about the kids. It is great if they can get some kind of brief training, but it's more about dealing with their feelings. It's a little bit more about the mental health, but kids will usually bounce back. They're usually pretty resilient. At least that has been my experience in my case in first person. Whereas I can tell you that when my parents were sent to Mexico, they had a hard time and I adapted a lot quicker. And my dad, after 3 years, he requested to be sent back. It was, I wouldn't say it was a failed assignment, but he was overwhelmed. And at one point, I think he assumed that Mexico would be similar to the Caribbean culture, he being Cuban. Yeah. Too many assumptions were made. There were no cross-cultural trainings or coachings in the day. And at the end, he had enough and he was ready to go back. So that's why I entered this field, is because I saw the suffering firsthand with my own family and saw how important it was to be able to be prepared here and here to be able to adapt to a new environment. You think it's so easy, but there's a lot of things you need to consider.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree with you, Maria. And I'm glad that your dad went back, your father went back, realized that some people don't have other choices and they fall into depression. I've seen it happen a lot of times. They result into being addicted to alcohol or some form of toxicity, and it's not pretty. So we really have to be aware of this and take it seriously, because we're not the same. We're not all the same. We have our unique identities that are just different from one another. And for some, we can cope well. For others, it doesn't happen that easy. And we just have to know it, talk about it, and have a plan. Fix it or make it better. And it's not easy.
Yeah. And you know what? Something also that is very important is that when you arrive to a new country, there are different ways that you can get help. Fortunately, in the USA, for example, there are some services that they help also kids or children in the schools, in the elementary schools, middle school, or high school. That's I am collaborating with one company, for example, that they are located in 16 states, West Care Foundation, and that they collaborate with the counties in the area, in different areas. So then they provide service, counseling service, like prevention, intervention, and more treatment with mental health problems. But they provide services to students, even in the school, even in summer, or from home, or with telehealth, providing some counseling, preventing problems, addressing problems, and building strategies or techniques or like coping skills, for example, that can help to manage challenges. I mean, what we are talking here, that is one of the challenges, right? How to not survive. I was not going to say survive, but how to revive, how to learn, how to deal with a new culture, with a new way, with a new challenge. So finding those services and providing those services, I think it is very important to families or new families in new places.
Interesting. I think we just have to really be aware of the different approaches out there that we can utilize to make the mental health issue a real issue that we can talk about, that we can discuss without any stigmas, without any shame, without any backlashes. That way we can ensure healthy continuity and healthy environment and healthy people around us.
And that's where people like Nuria can come in, either as a therapist or a life and wellness coach. It is well worth the while to make sure that you are maintaining yourself just like you would look for a coach or a trainer. It's important to make sure that your mental health is well.
Final remarks and final comments?
Well, I just would say, that taking care of your mental health is very important. It's just as important as physical health. So that's something that we need to realize in many cultures, in any culture, actually. So asking for help is the first step to friends, family, and finding the ways to get the help professionally.
Where can people find you, Nuria? Where can people locate you?
They can find me in any, in my website, for example, nuriawellness.com. I am also in LinkedIn, Facebook. So yes, they can contact me at any time, info@nuriawellness.com.
Awesome. One thing that I probably was going to ask you and I forgot to do, so this is a great time. How do you recognize the symptoms of mental health caused by change of environment as far as intercultural situations?
Well, symptoms, I am part of a master. I'm studying or finalizing a master degree in mental health. This is my third year studying that, right? After my psychology degree. So the symptoms of a mental health problem or disorder, it has to go through what we call the DSM. It's a psychiatric book, let's say, right? A psychologist book where we determine if it's a mental health disorder. So by determining the symptoms, it has to go through a different process that can be only by a professional. But sometimes, it's not only a symptom of a mental health disorder, it's also that it's coming to what is, for example, how to manage stress or stress management. The symptoms of stress or anxiety, it can be very different from one person to another, but also it can be affected by your environment, by your family, by your situation or your specific situation versus any other person, right? And how do we cope with that is going to be key in order to determine what is going to be the treatment for that situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you for that. Like you said, this topic is extremely important and it will lead to deeper understanding and appreciation of how our unique cultural identity intersect with mental health, paving the way for more inclusive and effective support system. Until next time, stay safe, stay well, and thank you so very much for your time. And for you, Maria, have a nice trip and stay safe out there, okay?
Thank you. Greetings from Jindao.
Thank you.
Brazil.
Thank you. Hasta luego, hasta la vista. Nos vemos pronto, hablamos pronto, ¿sí?
Hasta luego.
Hasta luego. Gracias. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.